Welcome to this training session on open access publishing. The session is split into two. The first half is the story of open access publishing via a comic strip, and the second half, my colleague Yvette will run through in detail how you publish open access with the support of the library. When we first ran this session, we had some network issues, so the first half is a re-record. So, open access comic strip, or everything you wanted to know about open access publishing, but were afraid to ask the Budapest Open Access Initiative. Okay, before we start our narrative on open access and publishing before the open access movement, we need to consider one thing. Academic authors are unlike other creators. Researchers do not generally expect to generate revenue from their research publications. This means that they are in a unique position to not require the reader to pay for their work. It's economically viable for them to give away their publications for free. Without this unique scenario, open access publishing could not happen. So, according to Stephen Barani, academic publishing changed fundamentally after the Second World War. In parallel with an unprecedented growth in scientific activities, academic publishing was transformed from a slow, small, inefficient process to an expanding, commercial, efficient, and very profitable industry. Figures like Robert Maxwell led the commercialization of academic publishing fundamentally by courting scientists to head new titles in new fields, increasing the number of titles in existence. This expansion was compounded in the 1990s when Elsevier and other big publishers like Wiley and Taylor and Francis established big deals. These big deals bundled the increasing numbers of journal titles into publisher portfolios and licensed them en masse to universities. On the face of it, this was a saving on price per title, but in effect, universities were now licensing titles they had no original intention to buy. The big deals led to the serials crisis. Too many STEM journals cost too much money and increase in price at too rapid a rate for libraries to sustain the level of access they need. The cost of STEM journals access distorts library budgets, driving out the less expensive journals and monographs and other resources. The current model, with several large commercial publishers dominating the field of STEM publishing and charging what they believe the market will bear, is unsustainable. It's already breaking down, with even the wealthiest libraries cancelling large numbers of journals. This reduction in access is compounded by inequalities of wealth. Access gaps are worse still in the developing world. In 2008, Harvard subscribed to 98,900 serials and Yale to 73,900. The best-funded research library in India, at the Indian Institute of Science, subscribed to 10,600. So, the serials crisis increases access gaps. So against this context of increasing costs and problems of access, the internet provided new opportunities. And on one level, you don't have to bother with printing and physical distribution and all the technologies and resources involved in that. But the internet also offered new methods to disseminate research findings alongside established subscription academic journals. In 1994, Stephen Harnard, a cognitive scientist and one of the first open access advocates, suggested his subversive proposal. He suggested scientists use a file transfer protocol to share their research findings. In the 1990s, subject repositories were established, most notably Archive and PubMed Central. These repositories hosted versions of papers in physics and medicine respectively on a free-to-read basis. In 2001, the Budapest Open Access Initiative took place. It's important because it established some context, some definitions, and some roots of open access. Arguably, it shaped the growth of open access publishing for the next 20 years. The BOAI defines both a utopian benefit and a practical efficiency in the emergence of open access publishing. An old tradition and a new technology have converged to make possible an unprecedented public good. Peer-reviewed journal literature should be accessible online without cost to readers. Secondly, the overall costs of providing open access to this literature are far lower than the costs of traditional forms of dissemination. So, the BOAI's version of open access is both utopian and pragmatic. It sees open access as benefiting society and opening up access to the academic literature, whilst also addressing the economic concerns of the serious crisis and big deal. And these principles of benefiting society, whilst restricting the spiralling cost of publishing, persist in discourses around open access today. Defining open access, reuse and copyright. By open access to this literature, we mean its free availability on the public internet, permitting any users to read, download, copy, distribute, print, search, or link to the full text of these articles, crawl them for indexing, pass them as data to software, or use them for any other lawful purpose, without financial, legal, or technical barriers other than those inseparable from gaining access to the internet itself. This definition not only talks about making the literature free to read, but also reusable in the context of the internet. It's not enough just to read it on the screen. You should be able to download it, copy it, text mine it, redistribute it, etc. So, at the very beginning, open access is entwined with permissive licenses to reuse the work, and this foreshadows the use of Creative Commons licenses in open access policies later in the OA story. Secondly, copyright. The only constraint on reproduction and distribution, and the only role for copyright in this domain, should be to give authors control over the integrity of their work and the right to be properly acknowledged and cited. Copyright is flagged as an issue. Copyright in academic publishing has historically been handed to the publisher at point of publication. Once copyright resides with the publisher has control over access and distribution of the work. The BOAI is indicating that copyright should not be used as a tool to constrain access, as it has historically. Rather, it should only be a tool to assert author attribution. The BOAI identifies two ways to achieve open access. Firstly, open access repositories. Researchers should deposit their referee journal articles in open electronic archives, a practice commonly called self-archiving. The BOA doesn't, ironically, indicate the difficulties people would have getting researchers to add their papers to repositories, a phenomenon that led to the existence of zombie repositories in the first decade of the millennium. Secondly, when these archives conform to standards created by the Open Archives Initiative, then search engines and other tools can treat the separate archives as one. Users then need not know which archives exist or where they are located in order to find and make use of their contents. Interesting, the BOA highlights the technical potential of a distributed set of repositories that can be crawled or systematically harvested to aid discoverability. It's quite a foresight when we consider the tools like Google Scholar we have today. Secondly, achieving open access via open access journals. The BOAI sets out the brave new world of open access journals, a new generation of journals committed to open access and to help existing journals that elect to make the transition to open access. So it's clear that these open access journals are either new or they're existing journals that flip to open access. The BOAI conceives of the phenomenon of a journal transitioning from a subscription model to an open access model. These new journals will no longer invoke copyright to restrict access. Instead, they will use copyright and other tools to ensure permanent open access to all the articles they publish. These new journals will not charge subscription or access fees, and they will turn to other methods for covering their expenses. So that's the BOAI. How did we get to the BOAI to here? How did we get to the mess we're in? The gold route. As indicated by the BOAI, no-fee open access journals have developed, but this is not cost-free. Their sustainability is based on voluntarism, grants, consortia, and/or institutional funding, rather than article processing charges. This is sometimes called Diamond Open Access. It's sometimes called Platinum Open Access. An exemplar of this would be the Open Library of Humanities. This is a scholar-led portfolio of humanities journals funded by voluntary library subscriptions. Open access journals are listed in the directory of open access journals, the DOAJ. And if you go to the DOAJ, you will see that the majority of open access journals listed there do not charge APCs. Secondly, the gold route, pay to publish. Alongside the no-fee open access journals, pay-to-publish journals have developed. Publishers like MDPI, Hindawi, Frontiers have created portfolios of journals whose financial sustainability is based on article processing charges. Authors here are directly faced with the cost of academic publishing and are required to source the charges. Whilst most of the journals listed in the DOAJ may not charge APCs, the majority of articles published open access do, so the volume is with the pay-to-publish route. Some journals have been criticised as akin to vanity publishing. Peer review has been criticised as lax and acceptance rates high. This has led to this concept of predatory publishing. Jeffrey Beal, a librarian based in Denver, created a blacklist of journals and publishers he considered predatory based on some criteria he created. It was called Beal's List of Predatory Open Access Publishers. He was criticised for being pro-legacy publishers and anti-non-Western open access publishers. His blacklist was taken down by his university after continued complaints from publishers on the list. Legacy publishers have gotten on the act. They have adapted and they allow articles to be published gold open access in existing titles for an article processing charge. This is called hybrid gold open access. And double dipping is where publishers get paid twice. Firstly, by the article processing charge paid by the author, and secondly, by the institution subscribing to the hybrid journal in which that open access article appears. Legacy publishers have also established new open access titles, for example, Nature Communications and their subjournals. Typically, these charges are higher than the new open access publishers. Higher charges, arguably, correlate to the prestige or the impact factor of the journal title. So, how much are these article processing charges? In 2018-19, average article processing charges by publisher ranged from $246 to $2,851. In 2020, Nature announced the price of an article processing charge to be €9,500. Why is there such a variance, and how can an APC be that high? One answer is that some publishers' charges do not correlate to the actual cost of the services provided. Rather, they will charge the market rate. However, publishers will justify these charges by highlighting the value that they add to the publishing processes. Publishers have listed 102 things they do to add value. These include managing rejection of submissions, managing the brand, and establishing infrastructure. It's a long list. But what about the other route, the green route, adding papers to repositories? How has that developed? The green route has its own problems. Researchers in some disciplines don't want to make submitted or accepted versions publicly available. They are inferior in quality to the published versions. Multiple copies in the public domain might be problematic. Submitted versions, accepted versions, and final published versions could be out there on the web. How do you know which one you're reading? What changes might have taken place across the versions? And how do you cite these different versions? It's complicated, and for sure, the final versions are better to read and cite. Green open access can speed up the rate of scholarly communications. Preprints can be posted years before the final published versions are available online. However, publishers will often require embargoes on accepted versions in repositories, and this delay affects the impact of the research as the open access version is never timely. But what about books? We've only talked about journal articles. The BOAI omitted books. Books were never part of the original concept of open access, but Peter Suber writes that journal articles are the low-hanging fruit. Books are higher-hanging, not forbidden fruit, but harder to attain. Books are predominantly published in arts, humanities, and social sciences, and they may well contain copyright materials. These materials may not be publishable with permissive Creative Commons license. And navigating these licenses for this content is daunting and an obstacle that hasn't satisfactorily been resolved. The Crossick report in 2015 highlighted these concerns and others. This report recognises that open access has a great deal to offer. However, extending open access to books is not easy. From licensing and copyright to business models and quality, the issues that must be tackled are thorny and numerous. But progress has been made. Researcher-led publishers like open book publishers exist and will publish without author fees. University presses have had a resurgence, and many will publish open access. Institutions are developing consortia models to fund open access books. And legacy publishers, they're also publishing open access books, and their prices range from £10,000 plus tax. You can check the Director of Open Access Books for all open access books publishers. Open access interventions. Open access interventions is what I'm calling those reports, plans and mandates that are the way funders and other organisations have attempted to make academic publishing free to read and influence the way open access publishing is done. Open access publishing has not developed organically. These interventions fundamentally affect how researchers publish, how publishers pursue business models, and how librarians attempt to mediate that activity. One of the first interventions in the UK was the Finch Report. Interestingly, the Finch Report was commissioned by the then Minister for Universities and Science, David Willetts, who had encountered firsthand the issues of paywalled academic research as an independent scholar, writing his book, The Pinch. The Finch Report was a cautious intervention, interested in both promoting open access and, at the same time, protecting the UK academic publishing industry, an industry that was reluctant to embrace open access models. In 2013, the RCUK Policy was a funder mandate on open access. Journal articles and published conference proceedings were in scope. There was a central block grant to support gold open access with a CC BY licence. Green open access was allowed with a 6 or 12-month embargo with a CC BY NC equivalent licence. These licences in the policy was not necessarily in line with what some of the publishers were prepared to do. Publishers typically do not specify a Creative Commons license for green open access, and if they do, it's more restrictive than CC BY NC. So we begin to see a divergence in what funders require and what publishers are allowing to relinquish. The policy expected compliance rates of 45% in 2013-14, 53% in the following year, and 100% by 2017-18. These compliance rates were not met. In 2016, the REF policy was about tying open access with eligibility for the REF 2021 REF cycle. The REF policy could not provide a central fund as the monies would have been enormous, so they relied on the green route to open access. Consequently, they were less demanding regarding the length of the embargoes and the licences than the RCUK policy. They allowed 12 months for STEM and 24 months for arts, humanities and social sciences. They did introduce a requirement to deposit within 3 months of acceptance or first online publication. The REF policy introduced an exception for gold open access, which basically trumped any requirement to do green open access. The policy had a high required compliance rate, with only 5% or 1 paper per unit of assessment being tolerated. Books and book chapters were out of scope. The policy was largely successful in getting REF publications compliant with the policy. However, just because something was compliant with the policy didn't make it open access. If you add a paper to a repository with a 24-month publisher embargo, that was compliant, but that's not immediate open access. The EC Horizon 2020 policy was a similar green open access policy with journal articles and published conference proceedings in scope, 6 or 12-month embargoes with no licence specified, and gold open access could have been provided from funds from the grant. And then comes Plan S. Plan S is more radical, and it's not a funder mandate, but it's a set of principles that funders can align to. Key aspects are gold open access has to be pure open access. And if you do hybrid open access, it's only permitted if publishers can show that their titles are transitioning to pure open access. CC BY licenses for both gold and green, they're the most permissive licenses, and 0 embargoes for green. Plan S has been criticised, and some funders have withdrawn support for it. They argue that some researchers, early career researchers and researchers in developing countries, rely on publishing and subscription titles as they don't need to find an article processing charge. And if these platforms are withdrawn, how will these people publish their research? Plan S is pushing librarians, researchers and publishers into places they don't want to go, or they don't feel comfortable going. So the latest policy, the UKRI policy in 2022, the UKRI are signatories of Plan S, so the new policy follows the Plan S principles. Gold open access is provided for in a central block grant, Creative Commons by license only. The journal not only has to publish the article Gold Open Access, but meets certain principles of transitioning to pure Gold Open Access. That's if you use the money from a central block grant. Green Open Access also requires CC BY license with a zero embargo, and there is provision for open access books from a central fund from 2024. So where are we now? Gold Open Access. Publishers and universities have negotiated transitional deals where researchers can read new and legacy subscribed content, and they can also publish in these things as an affiliated corresponding author. So they can publish in these titles without paying the article processing charge themselves. These transitional deals vary from publisher to publisher and may be capped by the number of articles published, the type of journal article, the type of journal, whether it's society-owned or a pure open access journal. They may not be covered in the agreement. Green open access. Green open access may now only be allowed with zero embargoes, potentially. Publisher policies do not currently allow this. Funders have suggested rights retention statements on submissions where authors retain the right to post an accepted version to a repository with zero embargo and a Creative Commons license. Will publishers accept these statements and make self-archiving policies more permissive, or will they reject that straight out of hand? Rights retention statement strategies are being mooted by some institutions. Edinburgh and Cambridge are at the forefront. But at the moment, publishers seem to be pushing back on this. We're aware that some papers being submitted with this statement are not being accepted for review unless the statement is being removed. But this is a quickly changing arena. Some journals may use this route in the short term so that they can be compliant with the UKRI policy. Well, that's the end of this little comic strip, but it's not the end of open access publishing. There are still some twists in the road to come. And now I'll pass over to Yvette for the second part of the training.
Okay. So if everyone's okay for me to carry on, if you have any other questions for Chris, then just pop them in the chat and we can deal with them as we go along. Hopefully this section won't take too long. And if we have time, we'll go over one or two scenarios. And if we do run out of time, I can provide some details for you after the session, so you have all of the information there. So my name's Yvette. I'm a research support officer, and I work with Chris in the research support team. And this section will just take a look at how you can publish open access and some of the practical steps you can take and where to look for the information that you need. So, gold open access, what does it actually mean? As you've heard from Chris already, essentially the gold route to open access is where your publication has been made available on a publisher's website, repository, or another publishing platform immediately. And this means that the paper in most cases will be available under a Creative Commons CC BY or attribution license. And you will find that many funders, such as UKRI, will require this type of license. And other Creative Commons licenses are available, but they do restrict how publications can be shared and reused. So CC BY is the way forward. So normally, under funder terms and conditions permitting, that would obviously be fine. But if you are UKRI funded, please note that we do have the open access policy that will be coming into effect from the 1st of April that Chris mentioned, which means that anything other than a CC BY will require you to apply for some kind of an exception to that rule. So if you do have funding from UKRI, please have a look at our website and you can see the new policy details there and how to apply for open access fees to be covered by the block grant as well. All the information's there for you. So obviously, in most cases, gold open access involves paying for the privilege, and you can find some of the open access journals out there that don't publish, charge to publish rather, and these are commonly known as APCs or article processing charges, but more often than not you will need to find a way to pay for those APCs. As I've just mentioned with UKRI, if you're funded by them, we do have a block grant fund that may be an option for you to pay for these fees, and you can check out the eligibility requirements on the link on the slide previous. And you can use, as Chris has mentioned as well, the DOAJ to find journals that don't charge APCs. Or you can check out our library deals, which I'll come to a little bit later on. So there are basically two types of gold open access journals, as you may know. They're hybrid and they're pure gold. The pure gold journals is where all of the articles in the journal are open access. So these are usually subsidised by an institution. And these journals are often, but not always, listed in the DOAJ. An example here is from Sage, one of the main publishers. This is a fully open access journal, and this is usually stated on the front page. As you can see there, it states that it's an open access journal. Hybrid journals is where some articles in a journal are open access, but there are others within that title that remain behind a paywall. So these are like the traditional journals that are offering optional open access as a way to monetize open access publishing. Hybrid journals always charge a publishing fee, an APC, and this is another example from Sage. So you can see that they offer two kinds of journal titles here, and you can usually find the details about their position on open access in the submission guidelines, as you can see on the bottom there. And they offer the optional choice of publishing via their Sage Choice publishing programme, as you can see in the information. So this is where transitional agreements and journals come in. And the OU Library has signed up to a number of transitional agreements with publishers that allow students and staff to read the content and to also publish with them. This is a move away, a transition away from the traditional subscription-only type agreements, where there really wasn't any support, any real support for publishing. The transitional journals within these agreements are generally hybrid in nature, so the deals will, in fact, what we have will allow you to publish in a hybrid journal title at no cost to you, whereas a pure gold title, they're very rarely included in with these deals. Instead, they may offer a discount instead of covering the full cost of an APC. So again, such titles in Sage, for instance, publishing in a hybrid title has a zero fee, whereas if you wanted to publish in a gold title, it will attract only a 20% discount for the fee. It can get quite complicated, which we've alluded to already, which is why we have some dedicated pages on our website to take you through all of the eligibility requirements of our agreements. So we're going to have a look at a couple of scenarios, if we can, before the end of the session. The first one we will look at is one where we're going to be using one of the OU Library's transitional deals. And if we have time, we can look at some of the other scenarios where we can look at using the UKRI block grant, how to find a title that doesn't attract an APC, using the DOAJ, and also a green open access option, which is where you wouldn't have any funds at all available to you. So I'm just going to stop sharing this slide now and share my screen, and I'll take you through some of the scenarios. So I hope everyone can see my screen. As with Chris, I can't see any of the chat in this view. Yep. So just call out if you need me to stop.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So for this first scenario, I'll take you through how you can publish gold open access in a journal using one of our transitional deals. So for this one, I've chosen Applied Microbiology and Biotechnology Journal, which is one of the Springer titles. So before submitting your article to a journal like this, it's always worth checking out what kind of journal it is. And usually the details are on the front page of the journal website. It's very rare that you have to go digging around for the information. It's usually there at the front. And as you can see here on this front page, it tells you that their publishing model is a hybrid transformative journal. If you click on the link here, how to publish with us, it should give you some details about their publishing options. Again, it tells us that it's a transformative journal, that it's open access. It gives you some of the details here about all the benefits of publishing with them, of course, and APCs. As you can see here, it tells you how much the APC would be for them, which is 2,690, which I probably think it's probably about average, really. You can also find on most of the main publishing websites a listing of all of their journals that are transformative or transitional. You can see here you can download a list to find out exactly which ones are included in the deal. So if you find another journal is more suited to your publication, then you can find out exactly whether it's included in our deal. And on our web page here, a quick check of the research support website tells you a list of all of the list of transitional deals that we have. And if I scroll down here, you can see the details of our Springer deal here. So it tells you that there's Springer open choice journals only. That's the hybrid journal titles that I mentioned earlier. And that it must be an original paper, review paper, brief communication, or a continuing education piece. So not all of the types of articles are covered, so you would need to check this as well. And you can also see some general information further up the page telling you that you must be the corresponding author to benefit from a deal. Generally, that you would need to use your OU email address to make sure that they can check your institutional affiliation, to make sure that you are a current member of staff, research staff, or a current PhD student. So all of this information on this page will help you to navigate all of that. So if you find that you want to go ahead with the deal, you can submit a request to the publisher and say to them that you wish to publish Gold Open Access through our transitional agreement with them. The request will come through to us and the research support team, and we check over the details and the eligibility criteria and approve it as necessary. And if we have any queries, we would also let you know. But generally, these are quite, they come through quite easily and there's no issues at all. So if you make sure that you bookmark this web page, and you can go back to it and check all of the eligibility deals as and when you're ready to publish in any of our covered journals. So that's the scenario one. I think we've got time for perhaps another scenario, if everyone's okay for me to carry on, if there isn't any questions or anything. Okay, so
no, please carry on with it.
One.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks.
The next scenario, I'll try and go through this quite quickly. We're going to look at publishing a paper when you're funded by one of the research councils that come under UKRI. So from the 1st of April this year, if you are funded by any of the research councils that you can see listed on the screen there, so AHRC, BBSRC, etc. There are a couple of different routes to publish that are compliant with the new policy, and there will be a UKRI block grant fund available to you to cover the costs of publishing. But there are some additional steps to take to make sure that the journal that you're choosing to publish in is compliant. So the first place to look at is obviously these pages here. our UKRI Open Access Policy page, and you can see if your research council is listed, and look at the conditions that you must meet to publish open access. You can see here that there are two routes. Route 1 is fully gold, where your paper is immediately available under the CC BY licence, and Route 2 is where you will publish in a subscription journal, one that doesn't offer immediate open access, and you can read the full policy details here on this page. So, is the journal you've chosen compliant with the open access policy though? And unfortunately today, as it stands, this is a difficult one to answer, as UKRI haven't yet released their journal checker tool. This should hopefully be released on the 1st of April in conjunction with the policy taking place. And this journal checker tool should be used to see whether it should be an easy way for you to check that your chosen journal meets all of the criteria. And once that's up and running, there will be a link to that tool here on these pages. So it'll be a very useful tool for all of us. But at the moment, we do have other ways to check certain criteria. There's websites such as Sherpa Romeo, which is here, if you've never seen this before, which is very useful to check out journal titles to see what their criteria are. And there's also an interim JISC transitional agreement lookup tool, but this is, I think it's just a beta version, so I think we ought to wait until the actual tool comes through. So first, let's just check your eligibility on the block grant page, which I believe is this one here. So you can see that you need to be funded by one of the research councils, of course, that we mentioned earlier, and you would need to be employed by the OU or be a current PhD student. And obviously before you submit any requests to us, it would be down to you to check whether your chosen journal is compliant. And you can see here, you have some full details here on the steps you need to take on how to request funds from the block grant. So for this example, I want to publish in Acta Psychologica, and this is an Elsevier title. So following the advice on the block grant page that we've just taken a look at, I just need to check if we have a deal first. So at the moment, we don't actually have a deal in place from Elsevier. You can see that it's not listed here. This is set to change, of course, which is some good news, but we don't have a deal with them at the moment. So far so good. So is this journal compatible? So it looks like it's an open access title. We can see clearly on this page here it says open access, and if we click that link, hopefully we can see some more information. So yeah, definitely it's permanently free for everybody to read, download, etc. They give you the option of using the CC BY license, which is what we need, and it clearly tells you that the article publishing fee will be covered. So for this particular journal title, it would be US dollars 1,500. So all looks okay. Sherpa Romeo that I just showed you here, you can double check all the details on here if you wish to. I'll just have a look here. So there we go, comes up with the title here, and this page will give you an idea of what their terms and conditions are. It gives you links through to their policies, and it will show you here that the published version, the CC BY version, can be made available straight away. There's no embargoes or anything like that, so I think we're good to go. So if you're happy with it and you want to go ahead, you can submit form to us. Let's see here, submit request form, and you can fill in the details here of all the details of the title of your projects, any reference numbers, and so on. And this form will come to us to check, and we can verify all of the details and offer you the funds from the grant. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of how to navigate some of our websites to find the information, and we'll provide you with a list of links. And unfortunately, we're probably running out of time now, so I can't really go through another scenario with you, but I'll also share those extra scenarios after the session, which I hope will be helpful to you.
Thanks, Yvette. We've got a question here. Do you request the funding before submitting the article or after it has been accepted?
Are we talking about UKRI funding, or are we talking about the transitional deals? UKRI, okay. With the new policy coming into effect from the 1st of April, it's probably best to check with us first, as early as possible if you can, to see that we have all of the information in place and that we can check for you that the journal that you've chosen is compliant. I think going forward we just need to be a little bit more cautious and do some thorough checking that we perhaps didn't have to do before. So if you have any queries at all about the UKRI funding, please get in touch with us. You can email us. I'll put the email address in the chat for everybody, and we'll help you out through the process. Thank you.
That's cool. That's nearly an hour.
Yeah. Also, before we go, I'm just going to put another link in the chat for everybody. If you have a moment, we'd really appreciate some of your feedback on the session. I know we've had some technical issues today, but I hope all of the information's got through to you, and you've learned a little bit more about open access publishing. But yeah, we would really appreciate you filling in the feedback. It's just a couple of questions, just to let us know what one thing that you enjoyed about it and one thing that you'd like to change. So thank you very much.
And we'll put the presentations together and we'll send them out along with the recordings at some point once we've concluded the session. I will try and work up the beginning comic strip up into a proper comic strip, as it were, and send that out too. So yeah, I think we're done.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for bearing with us, everyone.